The dinner rush at Luciano's had finally ended, leaving behind the lingering scent of garlic and red wine that clung to my uniform. My feet ached in the sensible black shoes I'd bought secondhand, and my lower back screamed from hours of bending to serve customers who barely looked at my face. 3 double shifts in a row had left dark circles under my eyes that no amount of drugstore concealer could hide. Riley, table 7 needs clearing. Marco, the floor manager, didn't bother looking up from his phone. And Mr. Castellano's reservation is in 20 minutes. His usual table needs to be perfect. My stomach tightened at the name. Dominic Castellano, the man who owned half the businesses in this part of the city, though nobody discussed exactly how he'd acquired them. I'd been working at Luciano's for 6 months, and I'd seen him come in every Thursday night like clockwork, always with an entourage of well-dressed men who spoke in hushed tones and never smiled unless he did first. I gathered the dishes from table 7, wincing as a steak knife clattered to the floor. My hands were shaking again. The medication for my anxiety was sitting untouched in my apartment because this month's rent had taken precedence. 1 more week until payday. 1 more week of rationing ramen noodles and tap water. Sorry, I mumbled, though nobody was listening. The restaurant transformed whenever Dominic arrived. The staff moved differently, spoke softly, and the air itself seemed to thicken with tension. I'd managed to avoid serving his table until now, but Vanessa had called in sick, and Marco had given me no choice. "He tips well," Marco had said with a shrug that suggested there was no room for argument. "Just don't screw it up." I was arranging the last fork at his table when the front doors opened. A gust of autumn air swept in, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and danger. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. The restaurant fell silent, conversations pausing mid-sentence as he entered, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. One scanned the room with practiced precision before nodding imperceptibly. Only then did Dominic step fully into the restaurant. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, who had never worried about bills, or feared walking home alone at night. His suit probably cost more than I made in 6 months, charcoal gray and perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders and lean waist. At 35, he was younger than most people expected a man of his reputation to be, with sharp cheekbones and eyes so dark they appeared black in certain light. I lowered my gaze quickly, pretending to adjust a napkin that was already perfectly aligned. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape, and my mouth went dry. I had 3 tables to serve tonight, and his was one of them. I could do this. I'd survived worse. "Good evening, Mr. Castellano." Marco's voice took on the ingratiating tone he reserved for VIPs. "Your usual table is ready." I retreated to the kitchen, leaning against the cool tile wall and taking deep breaths. Through the small circular window in the swinging door, I watched as Dominic took his seat facing the entrance. One of his men sat opposite him, while the other remained standing near the bar, his gaze constantly moving around the room. "What are you doing?" Lily, another waitress, appeared beside me with a tray of appetizers. "Is that for table 12? "No, I'm just getting my bearings. I have Mr. Castellano tonight." Lily's eyes widened slightly. "First time with the big boss, huh? Don't worry. He doesn't bite." She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. At least not in public. My cheeks flushed hot, and I busied myself preparing a water pitcher with lemon slices. "Any tips?" "Be invisible unless he needs something. Don't make eye contact unless he speaks directly to you. And whatever you do, don't spill anything on that suit." Armed with Lily's advice and the water pitcher, I approached his table. My hands were trembling so badly that the ice cubes clinked against the glass. I focused on pouring water without spilling, keeping my eyes down. "Good evening, sir. I'm Riley. I'll be your server tonight." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too high and too breathless. When he didn't immediately respond, I risked a glance upward. He was watching me with an intensity that made me feel naked, like he could see through my uniform to all the broken parts of me I worked so hard to hide. For a moment, those dark eyes held mine, and something shifted in the air between us. Recognition, perhaps, though I was certain we'd never met before. "The special tonight is seared scallops with a lemon butter sauce and—" "Bring us the usual," he interrupted, his voice deep and smooth like aged whiskey. "And a bottle of the 1982 Brunello." I nodded and turned to leave, relief washing over me that the interaction had been mercifully brief. But his voice stopped me. "Wait." I froze, my back to him, before slowly turning around. "Yes, sir?" "You're new." It wasn't a question. "I've been here 6 months, sir." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or annoyance, that he hadn't noticed me before. 6 months, he repeated, as if testing the words. "And yet this is the first time you've served my table." I didn't know how to respond to that. Had he been keeping track of the staff? The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Vanessa is out sick," I explained, then immediately regretted offering information he hadn't asked for. But instead of dismissing me, he studied my face for a long moment. "What happened to your cheek?" My hand flew to the fading bruise near my right eye before I could stop myself. The reminder of Jason, my ex, and the reason I'd moved to this city 3 years ago, with nothing but a backpack and $200. The reason I still checked the locks on my apartment door twice each night. "It's nothing," I lied. I walked into a door. His eyes narrowed slightly, and I knew he didn't believe me. Something dark passed across his features, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Bring the wine first," he said finally, dismissing me with a slight nod. I hurried to the wine cellar, my heart racing. The bottle he'd requested would cost more than my monthly rent. I cradled it carefully as I returned to the table, presenting it for his approval before opening it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. As the evening progressed, I fell into the rhythm of service, bringing courses and clearing plates with as little interaction as possible. But each time I approached the table, I could feel his eyes following me, tracking my movements with an attention that made my skin prickle. Not like the leering stares I sometimes got from drunk businessmen, but something more measured, more calculating. It was nearing 11 when the incident happened. I was carrying a tray of desserts to a nearby table when a customer pushed his chair back without looking, directly into my path. I swerved to avoid him, but my ankle twisted, sending me off balance. The tray tilted, and a chocolate soufflé slid dangerously close to the edge. In that moment of impending disaster, my eyes instinctively sought out the only person who might help. Not Marco, who would fire me on the spot, but Lily, who was serving a table on the other side of the room. Our eyes met, and in my panic, I gave her our private signal, a quick tap on my earlobe that meant, "Help me." But it wasn't Lily who moved, it was Dominic Castellano. Before the dessert could fall, he was somehow there, his reflexes impossibly fast for a man of his size. One hand steadied my elbow while the other caught the edge of the tray, balancing it effortlessly. His touch burned through the thin fabric of my uniform and I gasped at the contact. "Careful," he murmured, his lips inches from my ear, his breath warm against my skin. The entire restaurant had fallen silent, every eye fixed on us. No one had ever seen Dominic Castellano touch a waitress, much less rush to one's aid. His bodyguard had half risen from his seat, clearly alarmed by his boss's sudden movement. "Thank you," I whispered, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm sorry. Look at me." His voice was soft but commanding. I raised my eyes to his, and what I saw there stole my breath. Concern, yes, but something else. A possessive heat that made no sense coming from a man who didn't know me. "You should be more careful, Riley." The way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine. This city can be dangerous for someone like you. Before I could respond, he returned to his table, leaving me standing there with a perfectly balanced tray and the lingering sensation of his fingers on my skin. The restaurant gradually resumed its normal buzz, but nothing felt normal anymore. The air had changed, charged with something I couldn't name. An hour later, after his party had left and I was wiping down their table, I found an envelope tucked under a napkin. Inside was a stack of $100 bills, easily $1,000, and a business card with a phone number handwritten on the back. "What's that?" Marco asked, appearing beside me. I quickly tucked the card into my pocket. "Just a tip." "Must have been good service." His tone suggested something unsavory, and I felt my cheeks burn. That night, as I walked home to my tiny studio apartment. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The streets were nearly empty, but shadows seemed to move in my peripheral vision. Twice I stopped and turned around, finding nothing but the yellow glow of street lamps on wet pavement. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the encounter with Dominic Castellano had just rattled me. But when I reached my apartment building and fumbled with my keys, a black sedan with tinted windows drove slowly past. It circled the block once before parking across the street, engine running, headlights off. I rushed inside, double-checking the locks and drawing the thin curtains closed. As I changed into my worn pajamas, the business card seemed to burn a hole in my uniform pocket. I took it out, running my fingers over the embossed lettering. Dominic Castellano, Executive Director, Castellano Holdings. The handwritten number on the back was different from the one printed on the front. My phone sat on my nightstand, its screen cracked from the time I'd dropped it fleeing Jason. I should throw the card away. I should forget tonight ever happened. Instead, I placed it carefully beside my phone and climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin like they could shield me from whatever had changed in my life today. Little did I know, the simple act of mistakenly signaling to Dominic Castellano would transform my existence in ways I couldn't begin to imagine. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned in my threadbare sheets, my mind replaying the moment Dominic's hand had steadied mine, the heat of his fingers seeping through my uniform. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those dark, penetrating eyes that seemed to strip away my defenses and peer into the broken places I'd tried so hard to hide. The morning light filtered through my cheap curtains, casting shadows across my studio apartment. Everything I owned was visible from my bed. The hot plate where I made ramen, the rickety table I'd rescued from a curb, the single chair that wobbled dangerously if you leaned too far back. 6 months of tips had barely furnished this place, but it was mine. Safe. Anonymous. Until now. The business card still lay on my nightstand, innocent-looking despite the weight it carried. I picked it up, running my thumb over the embossed letters of his name. What did a man like Dominic Castellano want with someone like me? The question followed me through my morning routine, lingering as I showered in tepid water and dressed in my second-hand clothes. My phone buzzed with a text as I was leaving for my morning shift at the coffee shop, my second job, the one that filled the gaps between dinner service at Luciano's. Unknown number. Good morning, Riley. I trust you slept well. My heart stuttered in my chest. There was only one person this could be. How had he gotten my number? I hadn't called him. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond or block the number immediately. Before I could decide, another text appeared. Unknown number. The car is waiting downstairs to take you to work. You needn't walk in the rain today. I rushed to the window and peered through the curtains. Sure enough, the same black sedan from last night was parked directly in front of my building, engine running. A man in a suit, not one of the two from last night, but cut from the same cloth, stood beside it, his gaze fixed on my building's entrance. Panic gripped me. How did he know where I lived? How did he know my schedule? The walls of my apartment suddenly felt paper thin, my privacy violated in ways I couldn't comprehend. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling as I typed, "Me. I don't need a ride. Please don't send cars for me again." The response was immediate. Unknown number. The choice is yours, but my driver will remain available should you reconsider. This neighborhood isn't safe for a woman alone. The implied threat, or was it concern, in his words, made my skin prickle. I peered out the window again. The rain had started, a steady downpour that would soak me through before I reached the subway station. My umbrella had broken last week, and I hadn't been able to afford a replacement. With a frustrated sigh, I grabbed my bag and headed downstairs. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when I was already running late for my shift. The driver opened the car door as soon as I emerged from the building. Up close, I could see the subtle bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. He nodded respectfully, but said nothing as I slid into the back seat, the leather cool and smooth against my legs. The interior smelled of expensive cologne and leather, a stark contrast to the musty scent of my apartment. A small vase of fresh white roses was affixed to the door, their perfume filling the enclosed space. On the seat beside me was a paper bag from my favorite bakery, the one I occasionally window shopped at but never entered because their muffins cost as much as my hourly wage. Mr. Castellano thought you might appreciate breakfast, the driver said, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror as we pulled away from the curb. I opened the bag to find a still warm chocolate croissant and a cup of coffee. My stomach growled traitorously. How did he know where I live? I asked, leaving the bag untouched despite my hunger. Or my phone number? The driver's expression remained impassive. Mr. Castellano has resources. That's not an answer. His lips curved into the ghost of a smile. It's the only one I'm authorized to give. We drove in silence after that. I watched raindrops race down the tinted windows, tracing patterns on the glass with my fingertip. The car moved smoothly through morning traffic, taking side streets I didn't recognize until we pulled up in front of Brew House, the coffee shop where I worked. I'll return at the end of your shift to take you to Luciano's, the driver informed me. That won't be necessary. I gathered my things, deliberately leaving the bakery bag on the seat. Mr. Castellano insists. I don't care what Mr. Castellano insists on. The words came out sharper than I intended, fueled by fear and confusion. I don't know what game he's playing, but I'm not a toy. The driver's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. It would be wise to accept Mr. Castellano's courtesy, Miss Riley. A chill ran down my spine at his tone. This wasn't about courtesy, it was about control. I'd experienced enough of that with Jason to recognize the warning signs. Tell Mr. Castellano thank you, but I can take care of myself. I stepped out of the car into the rain, letting the door close behind me with a definitive thud. The morning rush at Brew House kept me too busy to dwell on the strange encounter. I served espressos and lattes to bleary-eyed commuters, wiped tables and restocked pastries with mechanical efficiency. But twice I caught myself scanning the street through the cafe's windows, half expecting to see the black sedan or one of Dominic's men watching me. My coworker, Zoe, nudged me during a rare quiet moment. You okay? You seem jumpy today. Just tired, I lied, forcing a smile. Didn't sleep well. She nodded sympathetically. By the way, someone left this for you. She handed me a small box tied with a silver ribbon. It was here when I opened up. My hands trembled as I took it. There was no card, no note, just a perfectly wrapped package that someone had delivered before the cafe even opened. Aren't you going to open it? Zoe asked, curiosity bright in her eyes. I slipped it into my apron pocket. Later. The weight of the box haunted me throughout my shift. By the time I took my lunch break, I couldn't resist any longer. I retreated to the employee bathroom, locked the door, and carefully unwrapped the silver ribbon. Inside the box, nestled in black velvet, was a delicate silver bracelet. A small charm hung from it, a shield with a tiny diamond at its center. Protection, clear as day. The message couldn't have been more obvious if he'd written it out. I closed the box with a snap, shoving it back into my pocket. The bracelet was beautiful and terrifying in its implications. What had I done to attract the attention of a man like Dominic Castellano? One mistaken signal, one moment of panic, and suddenly my life was being infiltrated by a man who was known for taking what he wanted, regardless of whether it was offered. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of anxiety. When I finally clocked out, the black sedan was waiting, just as the driver had promised. This time, I didn't get in. I walked straight past it to the subway station, ignoring the driver who stepped out and called after me. The subway was crowded with afternoon commuters, the air thick with the scents of perfume, sweat, and wet clothing. I found a spot standing near the door, clinging to the handrail as the train lurched forward. 3 stops to transfer, then 5 more to Luciano's. I could make it just in time for my shift if the trains were running on schedule. At the transfer station, I pushed my way through the crowd, keeping my head down. The feeling of being watched had returned, prickling at the back of my neck. I glanced over my shoulder, but saw only the usual mix of tired office workers and students. I was halfway up the stairs to the connecting platform when I spotted him, one of the men who had accompanied Dominic to the restaurant the night before. He was leaning against a pillar, pretending to read something on his phone, but his eyes flicked up to track my movement. Fear shot through me, and I ducked into the flow of people heading in the opposite direction. Had he been following me since I left the cafe? Or had he been waiting here, somehow knowing which train I would take? I emerged on a different platform than I'd intended, my heart racing. The next train arrived almost immediately, and I squeezed in just as the doors were closing, unsure of where it was headed, but desperate to escape. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of the man pushing through the crowd, his expression grim as the train pulled away. Relief washed over me, short-lived and bittersweet. I'd lost him for now, but I was on the wrong train, headed in the wrong direction, and the clock was ticking toward the start of my evening shift. By the time I arrived at Luciano's, I was 15 minutes late and soaking wet from the rain. Marco met me at the staff entrance, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. "Where the hell have you been?" he hissed, blocking my path. "Mr. Castellano has been asking for you." My blood ran cold. "What?" "He's at his usual table with some important clients. He specifically requested you as his server tonight." "But I'm not on the dinner schedule. I'm supposed to be on bar service." Marco's expression was unreadable. "Plans changed. Get changed quickly. Your uniform is in your locker. And for God's sake, do something about your hair." My locker contained not my usual black waitress uniform, but a new one, still black but made of finer material that whispered against my skin when I put it on. It fit perfectly, hugging curves I usually tried to downplay. There was no tag, no indication of where it had come from, but I knew. Just as I knew that the silver bracelet in my pocket and the car that had followed me all day were all part of some game I hadn't agreed to play. I pulled my wet hair into a neat bun, applied some lipstick I'd borrowed from Lily's locker, and steeled myself for the evening ahead. Whatever Dominic Castellano wanted from me, I would make it clear that I wasn't for sale, not for rides in expensive cars, not for silver bracelets, not for perfectly tailored uniforms. When I emerged from the back, Lily caught my arm, her eyes wide. "What did you do to get his attention?" she whispered. "Nothing," I said, the word bitter on my tongue. "Absolutely nothing." She didn't look convinced. "Be careful, Riley. There are rumors about him, about what happens to people who get on his bad side." "What about people who get on his good side?" I asked, though I already feared I knew the answer. Lily's gaze dropped. They disappear too, just in different ways. Her warning followed me as I approached Dominic's table, my spine straight despite the fear coiling in my stomach. He sat facing the entrance, as always, but tonight there were 4 other men with him, older, equally well-dressed, with the sharp eyes and careful movements of predators assessing potential threats. Dominic looked up as I approached, his dark eyes tracking my movement. Something shifted in his expression. Satisfaction, perhaps, at having maneuvered me exactly where he wanted me, despite my attempts to avoid him. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said, proud that my voice didn't waver. "May I start you with something from the bar?" "Riley," Dominic said, my name rolling off his tongue like he was tasting it. "I was beginning to worry you wouldn't join us." "Traffic was bad," I lied, avoiding his gaze. "Indeed." He didn't believe me. That much was clear. "Gentlemen, this is Riley, who will be taking exceptional care of us tonight." The men around the table assessed me with varying degrees of interest and dismissal. One, older than the rest with silver at his temples, smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "Charming," he said, his accent thick and Eastern European. "You have excellent taste, as always, Dominic." Heat rushed to my cheeks at the implication. Before I could correct him, Dominic spoke. "Riley is not one of my acquisitions, Victor. She is a valued employee of this establishment and will be treated with appropriate respect." His tone was light, conversational even, but something in it made Victor's smile fade immediately. The table fell silent, tension crackling in the air until Dominic broke it by ordering wine for the table. As I turned to fulfill the order, his hand caught my wrist, the same one where the silver bracelet now rested in my pocket. His touch was gentle but impossible to break without causing a scene. "You didn't wear my gift," he observed quietly, for my ears alone. I met his gaze directly for the first time that evening. "I don't accept gifts from men I don't know." Something flickered in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or appreciation for my defiance. "We could remedy that. There's a car waiting to take you home tonight. I'll be in it." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an invitation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the confidence of a man unaccustomed to refusal. "I prefer the subway," I said, gently but firmly extracting my wrist from his grip. His smile was slow and certain. "No, you don't." I walked away with his words echoing in my ears, feeling the weight of his gaze on my back like a physical touch. The evening stretched ahead of me, hours of navigating his presence while pretending I wasn't acutely aware of his every movement. And somewhere outside, a car was waiting, and with it, a man who had decided, for reasons I couldn't fathom, that I was his. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of tension. I moved between tables mechanically, hyper-aware of Dominic's presence even when my back was turned. His table required little actual service. Drinks were nursed slowly, courses lingered over, conversations conducted in hushed tones that ceased whenever I approached. But even when I wasn't directly serving them, I felt his eyes tracking me across the restaurant. By 11, most of the other patrons had left. Dominic's party remained, having shifted from dinner to cognac and cigars, the smell of expensive tobacco hanging in the air despite the restaurant's no-smoking policy. Marco said nothing about it, just as he said nothing about the new uniform I wore, or the way Dominic's gaze followed me. "Last call, gentlemen," I announced, approaching their table with practiced professionalism. "Is there anything else I can bring you before we close?" The silver-haired man, Victor, glanced at his watch and murmured something in a language I didn't understand. The others nodded, gathering their things. "I believe we're finished," Dominic replied, his eyes never leaving mine. "My associates have an early flight tomorrow." One by one, they stood, shaking hands with Dominic, before making their way to the exit, where 2 black SUVs idled at the curb. Security men materialized from the shadows to escort them, moving with the fluid precision of those accustomed to guarding important people. And then it was just Dominic, still seated, watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Your colleagues have left," I pointed out unnecessarily. "The kitchen is closed. Sit." He gestured to the chair across from him. Not a request, a command. I remained standing. "I'm still on shift. Not anymore." He nodded toward the back, where I could see Marco flipping the sign on the door to closed, before disappearing into his office. The other waitstaff had already begun their closing duties, studiously avoiding looking in our direction. Anger flared, hot and sudden. "Did you buy my time from my boss?" A flicker of something, perhaps surprise at my directness, crossed his face. "I merely suggested that you'd worked enough for one evening. That wasn't your decision to make." "Sit down, Riley." His voice softened, but the steel beneath remained. "Please." The please caught me off guard. I hesitated, then reluctantly took the seat across from him, perching on the edge as if ready to flee at any moment. Up close, I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw despite the lateness of the hour. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, too exhausted to maintain pretense. "The car, the bracelet, the uniform. What do you want from me?" He studied me for a long moment, long enough that I began to shift uncomfortably under his scrutiny. "Do you know who I am?" he finally asked. It seemed like a trick question. "Dominic Castellano. You own Castellano Holdings." "And what does Castellano Holdings do, in your understanding?" I swallowed hard. Everyone knew the rumors, the whispers about where his money came from. No one discussed it openly, but in a city this size, secrets had a way of spreading. Real estate, import, export, investments. I recited the official line from his company website, which I'd looked up after our first encounter. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. A diplomatic answer. "I don't know what you want me to say. The truth would be refreshing." I took a deep breath. "They say you're connected, that your family has controlled certain businesses in this city for generations." "They say," he repeated, amusement evident in his tone. "And what do you believe?" "I believe that men who send drivers to follow waitresses they've just met are dangerous, regardless of their occupation." Instead of being offended, he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger, almost approachable. "Fair enough," he conceded, reaching for his glass, "though I would argue that the danger depends entirely on one's intentions." "And what are yours?" I challenged, bolder than I felt. His expression sobered. "Last night, When you signaled to your colleague, it wasn't meant for you, I interrupted, heat rushing to my cheeks. It was for Lily. It's our code when one of us needs help. I'm aware of that now, he said, surprising me again. But in the moment, I saw a woman in distress, making a signal I recognized. Recognized? I echoed, confusion replacing some of my fear. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. In my line of work, certain gestures have specific meanings. The signal you made, touching your right earlobe twice, is one used by people under my protection when they're in trouble and can't speak freely. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You thought I was, what, one of your people? That I was signaling you specifically? Yes. His gaze was intense, searching my face, and despite realizing my mistake, I find myself concerned about you. You don't know me. I know enough. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing against the fading bruise on my cheek. I flinched at the contact and his eyes darkened. I know someone hurt you. I know you work 2 jobs and still struggle to make rent on an apartment in the worst part of the city. I know you send money to a post office box in Ohio every month, though you have no family there, you acknowledge. Terror gripped me, cold and paralyzing. How? Resources, he said simply, echoing his driver's earlier non-answer. The question isn't how I know these things, Riley. It's what I intend to do about them. There's nothing to do, I insisted, rising from my chair. My life is none of your business. He stood as well, his height forcing me to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. It became my business the moment I thought you were signaling me for help. But I wasn't. And yet, you need it all the same. Before I could form a response, the kitchen doors swung open and Lily emerged, her eyes widening when she saw us standing so close together. She hesitated, clearly unsure whether to interrupt. Your things are ready, she called to me after an awkward pause. Whenever you're finished. I'm coming now, I replied, grateful for the excuse to escape this unsettling conversation. I turned back to Dominic. I need to go. He nodded once, accepting the interruption with better grace than I'd expected. My car is still waiting. I'm taking the subway. His jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath the skin. It's after midnight. The neighborhood where you live is where I live. I cut him off. I managed just fine. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. There and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. As you wish. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sleek business card case. But take this. My private number. Day or night if you need anything at all, you call. I stared at the offered card, identical to the one still sitting on my nightstand. I already have one. Take another, he insisted. Keep it with you. To end the conversation more than anything else, I accepted the card, slipping it into my pocket alongside the still unworn silver bracelet. Good night, Mr. Castellano. Dominic, he corrected, his voice softening again. When we're alone, I'd prefer you use my first name. The intimacy implied in that request sent a shiver down my spine. We won't be alone again. His smile returned, confident and knowing. We'll see. I retreated to the staff room, my heart pounding against my ribs. Lily was waiting, her expression a mixture of concern and burning curiosity. What the hell, Riley? She whispered, helping me gather my things. First the car this morning, now he's staying late just to talk to you? What's going on? Nothing, I insisted, changing quickly out of the new uniform and into my own clothes. It's a misunderstanding, that's all. She didn't look convinced. Be careful. Men like him don't take rejection well. I'm not rejecting him because there's nothing to reject, I said, more sharply than I'd intended. He's confused me with someone else. Once he realizes that, he'll lose interest. But even as I spoke the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. The way he'd looked at me, the things he knew about me. This went beyond a simple case of mistaken identity. We left through the staff entrance, Lily linking her arm through mine as we walked to the subway station. The streets were quieter now, most of the restaurants closed, and the late-night revelers not yet emerged from bars and clubs. I scanned the parked cars as we passed, half expecting to see the black sedan trailing us, but the road was clear. Do you want to crash at my place tonight? Lily offered as we descended into the station. My roommate is away for the weekend. The offer was tempting. The thought of returning to my empty apartment, knowing Dominic knew exactly where I lived, sent a wave of anxiety through me. But hiding wouldn't solve anything. Thanks, but I'll be fine, I assured her, really. We parted ways at the transfer point, Lily heading west toward her shared apartment in a slightly better neighborhood than mine. Alone on the platform, I found myself listening for footsteps, scanning faces more carefully than usual. The train arrived half empty, and I chose a seat near the conductor's booth. Wrapping my arms around myself against the aggressive air conditioning, the bruise Dominic had noticed was almost gone now, a yellowish shadow against my pale skin. I touched it absently, remembering the gentle brush of his fingers. How had he known about the money I sent to Ohio? About my 2 jobs? About the struggle to pay rent? The train lurched to a stop at my station, and I emerged into the humid night air. Usually I walked quickly, keys clutched in my fist as a makeshift weapon, eyes alert for potential threats. Tonight, I found myself walking even faster, panic building with each shadow and unfamiliar sound. I was 2 blocks from my apartment when I noticed the man. He was leaning against a street lamp, smoking a cigarette, his face obscured by a hood. As I approached, he straightened, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under his boot. Something about his posture set off alarm bells in my mind. I crossed the street, quickening my pace. From the corner of my eye, I saw him do the same, maintaining the distance between us but definitely following. My pulse skyrocketed, and I fumbled in my bag for my phone, ready to call. Who? The police rarely responded quickly in this neighborhood. The business card seemed to burn in my pocket. No, I wouldn't call him. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of being right about the dangers of my neighborhood. I turned abruptly down an alley I knew connected to the next street over. A shortcut I rarely took at night because of its poor lighting, but which might help me lose my pursuer. The sound of footsteps behind me accelerated, and fear shot through me like electricity. I broke into a run, my worn sneakers slapping against the damp pavement. The alley seemed longer than I remembered, the distant street lamp at its end a beacon I couldn't reach fast enough. Behind me, the footsteps grew louder, closer. Something caught my ankle, a piece of debris or an uneven paving stone, and I stumbled, my momentum carrying me forward onto my hands and knees. Pain shot through my palms as they scraped against rough concrete. I scrambled to get up, but a hand caught my arm, yanking me backward. "Hey there, pretty girl," a voice slurred in my ear, the stench of cheap alcohol and cigarettes washing over me. "What's your hurry?" I twisted in his grip, panic lending me strength. "Let go of me." His laugh was ugly, mean. "Don't be like that. Just want to talk to you." "I'm not interested." I jerked away, but his fingers dug deeper, bruising. "Playing hard to get, huh? I like that." Terror clawed at my throat as I struggled, memories of Jason overlapping with the present danger until I couldn't separate them. I opened my mouth to scream, but his other hand clamped over it, muffling the sound. "Shut up," he hissed, his tone changing from pseudo-friendly to threatening in an instant. "Give me your bag and I might let you go." I bit down hard on his palm, tasting the salt of his skin and the grime of the city. He yelped, releasing my mouth but tightening his grip on my arm, spinning me around to face him. His features twisted with anger, a knife appearing in his free hand. "You bitch." The rest of his threat died as a shadow detached itself from the darkness behind him. There was a sickening crunch, and suddenly I was free, my attacker crumpling to the ground with a strangled cry. Standing over him was one of Dominic's men, the same one who had accompanied him to the restaurant the night before. "Are you hurt, Miss Riley?" he asked, his voice calm as if he hadn't just incapacitated someone twice his size. I stared at him, shock making my thoughts slow and disconnected. "How? Why?" "Mr. Castellano's instructions were clear," he said simply, bending to retrieve my bag from where it had fallen. "You are to be protected." The man on the ground groaned, attempting to rise. Without looking, Dominic's guard delivered a precise kick that rendered him motionless again. "I didn't call for help," I managed, my voice shaking. "I didn't use the card." "You didn't need to." He gestured down the alley, where I could just make out the silhouette of the black sedan. "We never left." The implication stunned me into momentary silence. They'd been following me all night, watching from a distance, waiting for... what? For exactly this to happen? For me to need saving so Dominic could prove his point? Mr. Castellano is waiting, the guard said, offering his arm with unexpected formality. I looked from him to the prone figure on the ground. What about? Others will handle it. His tone suggested I didn't want to know the details of what that handling might entail. I should have been afraid. I should have run in the opposite direction, away from men who handled things in dark alleys and watched women without their knowledge. But the adrenaline was fading, leaving me shaking and vulnerable. And the black sedan represented safety, at least from the immediate danger. I allowed the guard to escort me to the car, my legs unsteady beneath me. He opened the door, and there was Dominic, exactly as he'd promised earlier, waiting for me. His expression was thunderous as he took in my disheveled appearance, the tear in my jeans from the fall, the scrapes on my palms. Without a word, he shifted over, making space for me beside him. I slid into the leather seat, too exhausted to resist or question. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. I looked down at my hands, noticing for the first time the beads of blood welling from the abrasions. "It's nothing." I fell. He reached for my hands, cradling them in his much larger ones with surprising gentleness. From a compartment in the door, he produced a first aid kit, opening it with practiced efficiency. "This will sting," he warned, removing an antiseptic wipe. His touch was clinical as he cleaned the scrapes, but his eyes burned with an emotion I couldn't name. "He will never touch you again." The certainty in his voice sent a chill through me. "What will happen to him? Nothing you need to concern yourself with." That's not an answer. Dominic looked up from my hands, his gaze locking with mine. "Do you really want to know?" I didn't. The realization was uncomfortable, sitting heavy in my chest alongside the gratitude I couldn't help feeling toward this dangerous man who had, whether I wanted it or not, kept me safe tonight. "Why are you doing this?" I asked instead, my voice barely above a whisper. His thumb traced a circle on my wrist, just below the pulse point. "Because from the moment you looked at me across that restaurant, I knew you were mine to protect." The possessiveness in those words should have frightened me. Instead, I felt something else entirely, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way his eyes softened when they met mine. "I don't belong to anyone," I said. But the protest sounded weak even to my own ears. His smile was slow, knowing. "Not yet." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the silver bracelet, the one I'd left in my own pocket when changing out of the uniform. "But you will." As the car pulled away from the curb, carrying me toward an uncertain future with a man I barely knew, but who seemed to know everything about me, I couldn't help but wonder what other signals I'd unwittingly given him, and what they might ultimately cost me. The sedan glided through empty streets, its powerful engine barely a whisper in the night. I watched the familiar landmarks of my neighborhood fall away, realizing belatedly that we weren't heading toward my apartment. "Where are we going?" I asked, tension creeping back into my voice. Dominic's hand still held mine, his thumb tracing idle patterns across my skin. "Somewhere safe. My apartment is safe." Even I didn't believe the lie. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes darkened. "Your apartment has a broken window latch in the bathroom, a door that could be kicked in with minimal effort, and a landlord who hasn't updated the security system since the 90s. He paused, watching my reaction. "Your neighbor in 2B has a key to your unit, courtesy of the previous tenant who never returned it. He's used it twice in the past month while you were at work." Horror washed over me in a cold wave. "How do you—" "I told you. Resources." His grip on my hand tightened slightly. "You're not going back there tonight, perhaps not at all." The casual way he dismissed my home, my independence, sparked anger through my exhaustion. "You don't get to make that decision. Someone tried to hurt you tonight, Riley." His voice remained calm, but something dangerous lurked beneath. "If Miguel hadn't been there, because you ordered him to follow me," I cut in. "I didn't ask for protection. And yet, you needed it." I pulled my hand from his, wrapping my arms around myself. "One night, I'll stay somewhere else for one night, but tomorrow, I'm going home." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. One night. The car turned onto a tree-lined avenue in an upscale neighborhood I rarely had reason to visit. Elegant townhouses with wrought iron fences gave way to a gated community where a security guard waved us through without stopping. We pulled into a circular driveway fronting a sprawling mansion that looked more like a small hotel than a private residence. "This is your house?" I asked, unable to hide my astonishment. "One of them." He stepped out as the driver opened his door, then extended his hand to help me. "The most secure." I hesitated before taking it, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my arms. The house loomed before us, windows glowing with warm light despite the late hour. Two men in suits stood flanking the massive front door, their postures alert despite the stillness of the night. "Do you always have this much security?" I asked as we approached, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." He placed his hand at the small of my back, guiding me up the steps. The touch was light, but proprietary in a way that made my pulse quicken. Though it's been increased recently. The implication hung in the air between us. Increased because of me? Because he'd brought a stranger into his inner circle? Or was there some other threat I wasn't aware of? The guards nodded respectfully as we passed, their eyes sweeping over me with professional assessment before returning to their vigilant watch of the grounds. The front door opened before we reached it, a silver-haired woman in a simple black dress standing in the threshold. "Mr. Castellano," she greeted, her accent faintly European. "We've prepared the blue suite as requested." "Thank you, Elena," Dominic replied, ushering me inside. "This is Miss Riley. She'll be staying with us tonight." Elena's eyes flickered over my disheveled appearance, the torn jeans, scraped hands, and tangled hair, but her expression remained impassive. "Of course, sir. Would you like me to show her to her room? I'll do it," he said. "Please have some food sent up, and find her something to wear." "Right away." She disappeared down a hallway, her footsteps silent on the marble floor. I stood in the cavernous entryway, feeling small and out of place amid the obvious wealth surrounding me. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. Priceless artwork adorned walls paneled in dark wood. It was beautiful but intimidating, a reminder of how different our worlds were. "Come," Dominic said, his hand returning to the small of my back. "You should rest." He led me up a sweeping staircase to the second floor, down a corridor lined with closed doors. The house was silent except for our footsteps and the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. At the end of the hall, he stopped before a set of double doors, opening them to reveal a suite that was larger than my entire apartment. A four-poster bed dominated the room, draped in blue silk that matched the curtains framing floor-to-ceiling windows. A sitting area with a small sofa and armchairs surrounded a fireplace where flames danced behind a protective screen. Beyond an archway, I glimpsed a marble bathroom with a clawfoot tub large enough for two. "This is excessive," I managed, overwhelmed by the opulence. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "It's secure." He crossed to a panel near the door, entering a code. "The windows are bulletproof. The doors lock from the inside only. No one will enter without your permission." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they reminded me of exactly who he was. A man who needed bulletproof windows and security codes, whose life was built around the constant threat of violence. "Thank you," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "For tonight. For earlier." His expression softened slightly. "You don't need to thank me for keeping you safe, Riley. That's not why I'm doing this." "Then why?" The question had been haunting me since that first night in the restaurant. Why me? Why now? He moved toward me, closing the distance between us with measured steps until he stood close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. His hand rose to cup my cheek, thumb brushing over the fading bruise that had first caught his attention. "Because when I saw this," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I wanted to kill the man who put it there." A shiver ran through me at the casual mention of violence, but I didn't pull away. "You don't even know him. I know he hurt something precious." His eyes held mine, intense and unwavering. "Something that belongs to me." "I don't belong to you," I repeated, but the protest sounded weaker than before. "Not yet," he agreed, echoing his earlier words. His thumb moved to trace the outline of my lower lip. "But you will." The certainty in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in my abdomen, a dangerous attraction I couldn't afford to acknowledge. I stepped back, breaking the contact between us. "I should sleep," I said, my voice unsteady. "It's been a long night." He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. "Elena will bring you food and clothes. If you need anything at all, press the intercom by the bed. I'll hear you." The implication that he would be listening, waiting for my call in the night, sent another shiver through me, not entirely from fear. "Good night, Dominic," I said, testing his first name on my tongue for the first time. Something flickered in his eyes, satisfaction perhaps at this small concession. "Good night, Riley." He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "Tomorrow we'll talk about Jason." My blood turned to ice. "What?" "The man who gave you that bruise, the one you're hiding from in Ohio." His expression was calm, matter of fact. "The one you send money to every month to keep him from finding you." Panic clawed at my throat. "How do you know about Jason?" "I know everything about the people who matter to me." He opened the door, his silhouette framed by the light from the hallway. "Rest now. You're safe here." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the opulent suite that suddenly felt like a beautiful prison. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my legs no longer able to support me. How did he know about Jason, about the payments? I'd been so careful, using cash and money orders, never leaving a digital trail that could be followed. A gentle knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. Elena entered carrying a tray of food and a stack of folded clothing. "I brought you something to eat," she said, setting the tray on a small table near the fireplace. "And clothes for sleeping and tomorrow. Mr. Castellano thought you might prefer not to return to your apartment right away." Of course he did. He'd already decided I wouldn't be going back, regardless of our agreement. "Thank you," I said automatically, too tired to argue with someone who was just following orders. Elena nodded, turning to leave, but hesitated at the door. "He's never brought anyone here before," she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine. "Not in all the years I've worked for him." Before I could respond, she was gone, closing the door softly behind her. I sat frozen, turning her words over in my mind. What did it mean that I was the first? Was that supposed to make me feel special, honored? Or was it a warning about how seriously he took this, whatever this was? The food, some kind of pasta with a delicate cream sauce, sat untouched as I moved to the bathroom, shedding my torn and dirty clothes. The shower was a technological marvel with multiple jets and settings I didn't bother to figure out. I stood under the scalding spray, letting it wash away the grime of the alley and the lingering sensation of my attacker's hands. Afterward, wrapped in a towel softer than anything I'd ever owned, I examined the clothes Elena had brought. Silk pajamas in a deep blue that matched the room's decor, a simple dress for tomorrow in a soft gray. Undergarments still bearing designer tags, all in my size. I slipped on the pajamas, the fabric whispering against my skin. Had he already been planning for this moment? Had he purchased these things in anticipation of bringing me here? Or did he simply have a house full of women's clothing in various sizes, prepared for any guest he might bring home? The thought was unsettling. I returned to the bedroom, hunger finally overcoming my anxiety. The pasta was still warm, and despite everything, I found myself devouring it, not realizing how hungry I'd been until the first bite hit my tongue. As I ate, I explored the room, testing the locks on the door, they worked, and examining the intercom system by the bed, a simple button that presumably connected to Dominic's room or office. The windows overlooked manicured gardens illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. In the distance, I could make out the silhouettes of men patrolling the grounds. I was a prisoner here, albeit in a gilded cage. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't need to check the locks twice or sleep with one eye open. Whatever Dominic's intentions toward me, I knew with bone-deep certainty that no one would hurt me here. The bed, when I finally crawled into it, was sinfully comfortable, the sheets cool and smooth against my skin. Exhaustion pulled at me, but sleep remained elusive as my mind churned with questions. Why had Dominic fixated on me? What did he want? And most pressing of all, what did he know about Jason that I didn't? I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke with a start to sunlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The attack, the rescue, Dominic's house. A soft knock at the door made me sit up, pulling the covers to my chin like a shield. Yes? Breakfast, miss? Elena's voice called. May I come in? Just a minute. I scrambled out of bed, ran a hand through my tangled hair, and opened the door. Elena stood with another tray, this one bearing coffee, fresh fruit, and what looked like French toast. Behind her was a younger woman with an armful of clothing. Mr. Castellano thought you might need more options, Elena explained, nodding to the clothes. Bianca can help you find something suitable. Suitable for what? I asked, stepping back to allow them entry. For your meeting, Elena replied, setting the tray beside the remains of last night's dinner. Mr. Castellano has requested your presence in his study at 10. A glance at the ornate clock on the mantel showed it was already 9. I need to get to work, I protested. My shift starts at 11. Mr. Castellano has spoken with your employers, Elena said, her tone suggesting this was a routine matter. Your shifts have been covered for today. Anger flared, hot and immediate. He had no right to do that. Elena's expression remained carefully neutral. You can discuss that with him at 10. She gestured to Bianca, who was arranging the clothing on the bed. Bianca will stay to assist you. I don't need assistance dressing myself, I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. None of this was Elena's fault. I'm sorry. I don't like having decisions made for me. Something like sympathy flickered in the older woman's eyes. Few who enter Mr. Castellano's orbit maintain complete independence, Miss Riley, but not all cages are prisons. With that cryptic statement, she left, closing the door behind her. Bianca, who couldn't have been more than 20, offered me a shy smile. Would you like to see the options, miss? Mr. Castellano was very specific about the colors. Of course he was. I sighed, gesturing for her to continue. What choice did I have? I was in his house, surrounded by his staff, dependent on his hospitality. For now, at least, I would play along. The clothes were beautiful, simple but clearly expensive, in shades of blue and gray that flattered my coloring. I chose a knee-length dress in pale blue, its modest cut belying the luxury of the fabric. Bianca offered to style my hair, but I declined, settling for a simple ponytail that kept it out of my face. At precisely 10 o'clock, I stood outside the door to Dominic's study, my borrowed clothes feeling like a costume. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated, uncertainty washing over me. What was I doing here? What did I hope to gain from this meeting? Before I could decide whether to knock or flee, the door opened, revealing Dominic in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, his sleeves rolled up to expose muscular forearms. He looked younger like this, less intimidating than in his tailored suits. Riley, he said, his eyes sweeping over me with obvious appreciation. You look beautiful. These aren't my clothes, I reminded him, stepping past him into the study. The room was exactly what I would have expected. Dark wood, leather-bound books, a massive desk that probably cost more than a year's salary at both my jobs combined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the front drive, giving Dominic a clear view of anyone approaching the house. They suit you better than what you had, he said, closing the door. Please sit. I chose an armchair rather than the sofa, maintaining some distance between us. You called my bosses. He moved to a sideboard, pouring 2 cups of coffee from a silver pot. Yes. Without asking me. You needed rest. He handed me a cup, the porcelain delicate in my hands. And we have matters to discuss that couldn't wait. What matters? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He sat across from me, his posture relaxed but his eyes intent. Jason Miller, 32 years old, former boyfriend, current stalker. 3 domestic violence complaints filed against him in Ohio, all mysteriously dropped. You lived with him for 2 years before fleeing in the middle of the night with nothing but a backpack and the cash you'd been hiding in a tampon box. Each word was like a physical blow. I set down the coffee cup before my shaking hands could spill it. How do you know all this? I told you. Resources. He leaned forward, his expression grave. What I can't understand is why you're still paying him. The question caught me off guard. I'm not. $500 a month to a post office box in Cleveland, he interrupted. Money orders purchased with cash from different locations around the city. Very careful, very untraceable, but not invisible to someone who knows where to look. Shame burned in my chest, hot and suffocating. He knows things about me. Things I can't let him share. What things, Riley? Dominic's voice softened, coaxing rather than demanding. I shook my head, tears threatening. Some secrets were too heavy to share, even with someone who already seemed to know so much about me. He can't hurt you anymore, Dominic said, filling the silence. Not while you're under my protection. I can't stay here forever, I whispered, the truth of it aching in my chest. This beautiful house, these expensive clothes, the safety Dominic offered, none of it belonged in my reality. Why not? The simple question stunned me into momentary silence. Because this isn't my world. I'm a waitress with 2 jobs and an apartment I can barely afford. I'm what? He prompted when I trailed off. Dangerous, I finished honestly. Powerful, connected to things I don't want to be part of. A smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. And yet, here you are. Because your man saved me from a mugger that your surveillance put me in the path of, I countered. One night, remember? That was our agreement. Agreements change, he said simply. Circumstances change. What circumstances? Instead of answering, he reached for a folder on the table between us, opening it to reveal photographs. With a sick feeling of dread, I leaned forward to see what they contained. Jason's face stared up at me, older than I remembered but still hauntingly familiar. The cruel set of his mouth, the coldness in his eyes, it was all the same. In one photo, he was exiting an airport terminal. In another, checking into a hotel. The timestamp on both was yesterday. He's here, I whispered, the blood draining from my face. In this city. Yes. Dominic's voice hardened. He arrived yesterday morning, checked into the Westbrook Hotel downtown, made 3 calls to your workplace trying to get your schedule. Terror gripped me, icy and paralyzing. Did they? No, Dominic assured me. Marco has been instructed never to give out staff information, but Jason is persistent. He'll find you eventually if you return to your old life. The implication was clear. My only safety lay with Dominic, in his world, under his protection. It was a trap, as surely as Jason's love had been a trap, but with golden bars instead of bruises. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice barely audible. Why are you doing all this? Dominic set the folder aside and moved to kneel before my chair, bringing us eye to eye. His hands covered mine, warm and steady against my trembling fingers. Because from the moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be mine, he said. The simple conviction in his voice more frightening than any threat could have been. Because the thought of anyone hurting you makes me want to tear this city apart brick by brick, because you deserve to be protected, cherished, kept safe. Kept, I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. Like a possession. Like something precious, he corrected, his thumbs tracing circles on my palms. Stay with me, Riley. Let me give you the safety you've been seeking. Let me deal with Jason. Permanently. The implication behind that last word made me shudder. I don't want him dead. No? Dominic's eyes searched mine. After everything he did to you, everything he threatened to expose? I looked away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. Violence doesn't erase violence. It just creates more. Sometimes, he said softly. It's the only language men like Jason understand. Before I could respond, a knock at the door interrupted us. Dominic rose smoothly, his expression closing off as he called for the person to enter. One of his security men, Miguel, the one who had saved me in the alley, stepped into the room, his face grim. Sir, we have a situation. Dominic's posture changed instantly, tension radiating from every line of his body. "What kind of situation?" "Miller," Miguel said, his eyes flicking briefly to me. "He's at the restaurant, making a scene, demanding to see her." The floor seemed to drop away beneath me, the room spinning as panic clawed at my throat. Jason was at Luciano's. He'd found me, just as Dominic had predicted, just as he'd always promised he would. "Get the car," Dominic ordered, his voice deadly calm. "And call Victor. Tell him I need a favor." Miguel nodded once and disappeared, closing the door behind him. Dominic turned back to me, his expression softer but no less determined. "It seems our conversation will have to wait," he said, extending his hand to help me up. "But the choice remains the same, Riley. Stay with me and let me handle this, or face him alone." As I placed my trembling hand in his, I knew there was no real choice at all. Jason had found me, and the only protection I had was the dangerous man standing before me, offering safety at a price I was only beginning to understand. The drive to Luciano's passed in tense silence. Dominic sat beside me in the back of the sedan, his hand covering mine in a gesture that was both possessive and reassuring. 2 more cars flanked us, one ahead, one behind, filled with men whose job it was to keep Dominic safe, to keep me safe, at least for now. "What will happen when we get there?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible over the purr of the engine. Dominic's thumb traced circles on my palm, a rhythmic movement that seemed designed to soothe. "That depends on him." "On Jason?" "Yes." His eyes met mine, dark and unreadable. "If he's reasonable, he'll accept compensation to leave and never contact you again. And if he's not reasonable," I already knew the answer, but something in me needed to hear him say it. Dominic's expression hardened. "Then I'll handle it differently." The calm certainty in his voice sent a chill through me. "I don't want anyone hurt because of me. The choice isn't yours to make." His grip tightened slightly. "Jason made his decision when he put his hands on you, when he followed you here, when he threatened to expose whatever secret he holds over you." I turned away, watching the familiar streets of the city blur past the window. We were entering the business district now, where Luciano's occupied the ground floor of an elegant pre-war building. Even from a block away, I could see the cluster of dark SUVs parked haphazardly at the curb. "Victor's men," Dominic explained, following my gaze. "He controls this territory. I needed his permission to resolve matters here." The casual mention of territories and permissions was a stark reminder of exactly who Dominic was. Not just a wealthy businessman, but a man with the kind of power that operated outside normal laws and constraints. As our car pulled up to the restaurant, I could see figures moving inside, despite the closed sign hanging in the window. Marco stood just inside the door, his face pale with stress. Beside him was a man I recognized as one of Victor's security team from the dinner 2 nights ago. "Stay in the car until Miguel opens your door," Dominic instructed, his voice leaving no room for argument. "When we go in, stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. And whatever happens, don't show fear." Easy for him to say. Fear was a living thing inside me, coiling and uncoiling with every breath. Fear of Jason, yes, but also fear of whatever Dominic planned to do, of the violence that seemed to hover just beneath the surface of his calm exterior. Miguel opened Dominic's door first, scanning the street before nodding once. Only then did he move to my side, offering his hand with unexpected formality as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The air was cool against my skin, carrying the scent of approaching rain. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a fitting soundtrack for the confrontation ahead. Dominic's hand settled at the small of my back, guiding me toward the entrance. The pressure was light but insistent, brooking no hesitation. As we approached, Marco hurried to unlock the door, his relief at seeing Dominic palpable. "Mr. Castellano, thank God," he said, his voice low and urgent. "He's been here for an hour, refusing to leave. Says he's her fiancé, that she's stolen from him." Dominic's expression didn't change, but I felt the tension radiating from him. "Where is he now?" "In the back dining room with Victor's men," Marco replied, casting a nervous glance at me. "He doesn't know I called you. Good." Dominic turned to Miguel. "Keep Riley close. If anything happens, get her out immediately." Miguel nodded, moving to stand slightly behind me, a human shield ready to whisk me to safety at the first sign of trouble. The gesture should have been comforting, but instead, it heightened my anxiety. What was Dominic expecting to happen? We moved through the empty restaurant, past tables still set for a service that would clearly not be happening today. The back dining room was a smaller, more intimate space used for private parties and special events. As we approached, I could hear voices. One raised in anger, the others low and controlled. Jason. Even after 3 years, the sound of his voice sent ice through my veins. My steps faltered, and Dominic immediately sensed my distress. He turned, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that momentarily drove away the fear. "He can't hurt you anymore," Dominic said, his voice pitched for my ears alone. "I won't let him." The simple promise steadied me. I took a deep breath and nodded, allowing him to lead me the last few steps into the dining room. Jason stood in the center of the space, his back to us. He was thinner than I remembered, his once muscular frame whittled down to wiry tension. 2 men in suits flanked him, their postures alert but casual, as if they dealt with angry men every day, which, I realized, they probably did. "I know she works here," Jason was saying, his voice carrying that familiar edge of controlled rage. "And I'm not leaving until I see her. She owes me." "What exactly does she owe you?" Dominic asked, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Jason whirled around, his eyes widening first in surprise at the interruption, then narrowing as they landed on Dominic. When his gaze shifted to me, standing half-hidden behind Dominic's broader frame, his expression transformed into something ugly and possessive. "Riley," he breathed, taking a step forward before Victor's men moved smoothly to block his path. "So this is where you've been hiding?" "She hasn't been hiding," Dominic replied before I could speak. "She's been under my protection." Jason's eyes darted between us, quickly assessing the situation. I could almost see the wheels turning in his mind, calculating his odds, weighing the potential threat Dominic posed against whatever he hoped to gain from finding me. "Your protection?" Jason's laugh was harsh, disbelieving. "Is that what they're calling it now? You always did have a talent for spreading your legs to get ahead, didn't you, Riley?" Dominic moved so quickly I barely registered it. One moment he was beside me, the next he was across the room, his hand around Jason's throat, lifting him slightly off the ground with a strength that seemed impossible for his lean frame. "Speak to her like that again," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "and it will be the last thing you ever say." Jason clawed at Dominic's hand, his face reddening as he struggled for breath. Victor's men made no move to intervene, their expressions suggesting this was a perfectly reasonable response to the insult. "Dominic," I said, stepping forward despite Miguel's restraining hand on my arm, "please." For a moment, I thought he wouldn't listen. Then, with obvious reluctance, he released his grip, allowing Jason to stumble back, gasping for air. "You're making a mistake," Jason wheezed, rubbing his throat. "You don't know what she is, what she's done." "I know exactly who she is," Dominic replied, straightening his cuffs with casual precision. "The question is, what are you doing in my city threatening someone under my protection?" Jason's eyes widened slightly at the implied ownership of the city, a flicker of understanding and fear crossing his face. "I'm not threatening anyone. I just want what's mine." "And what would that be?" Dominic's tone was conversational now, almost friendly, which somehow made it more menacing. "Money for starters," Jason said, regaining some of his bravado. "She's been paying me for a reason. Ask her about Columbus. Ask her about what happened to that girl." Ice flooded my veins. I'd known this was coming, known that if Jason ever found me, he would use the one thing I couldn't bear to have exposed. The secret that had haunted me for 3 years, that had kept me sending money I couldn't afford to a man I despised. "I'm not interested in ancient history," Dominic said, his gaze never leaving Jason's face. "I'm interested in your future, specifically whether you want to have one." The threat hung in the air, clear and unmistakable. Jason swallowed hard, his eyes darting to Victor's men, who watched the exchange with the detached interest of spectators at a sporting event. "Is this how it's going to be?" Jason asked, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "You're going to let your new sugar daddy make your decisions now, Riley. What happens when he finds out you're a murderer?" The words seemed to echo in the silent room. Murderer. The accusation I'd been running from for 3 years. The lie Jason had crafted to keep me under his control even after I'd escaped his physical abuse. That's enough, Dominic said, his voice low and dangerous. But it wasn't enough for Jason. He sensed weakness, my weakness, and pressed his advantage. She killed a girl in Columbus, pushed her off a balcony during a fight. I covered it up for her, made it look like an accident. I have proof. Photos of the body, Riley's confession, everything. That's why she's been paying me. He's lying, I said, finding my voice at last. Amy fell. It was an accident. I tried to save her. Jason's smile was cruel. That's not what you said that night, not what you wrote in that letter I still have. I killed her. God help me, I killed my best friend. Your words, Riley. Shame and grief overwhelmed me, burning in my chest like physical pain. Amy's face flashed in my memory. Her smile, her kindness, the way she'd tried to help me leave Jason that night. The way she'd confronted him about the bruises she'd seen on my arms, not knowing what he was capable of. Tell me what happened, Dominic said quietly, moving to stand beside me. The truth, Riley. I looked up at him, searching his face for judgment, for disgust, for the rejection I'd been expecting for 3 years. Instead, I found only calm certainty. A steady presence offering support without condition. Amy was my roommate in college, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. We lived in an apartment on the 3rd floor. She knew Jason was hurting me, kept trying to get me to leave him. That night he came over drunk, angry about something. Amy confronted him, told him she'd called the police. The memories rushed back, sharp and painful as broken glass. He went crazy, started throwing things, breaking furniture. Amy tried to get between us when he grabbed me. There was a struggle and she fell against the balcony railing. It gave way. It was old, rotted. She fell. Tears streamed down my face now unchecked. I tried to catch her. I swear I tried. But Jason pulled me back. He said no one would believe it was an accident, that they'd blame me because we'd been arguing earlier that day. He made me write a confession, said he'd keep it safe in case the police ever suspected foul play. But they didn't, Dominic guessed, his eyes never leaving mine. I shook my head. The investigation ruled it an accident. Faulty railing. But Jason kept the letter, kept threatening to send it to the police if I ever left him or stopped paying. He said they'd reopen the case, that I'd go to prison. Liar, Jason spat, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. You pushed her. I saw you. No, I said, stronger now. You pulled me away from her. You let her fall. You're the reason she died. Something shifted in Dominic's expression. A coldness settling over his features that made him look like a stranger. He turned to Jason, and whatever Jason saw in his eyes made him take an involuntary step back. You blackmailed her, Dominic said, each word precise and weighted. Used a tragedy to control her. Followed her across state lines to continue your extortion. Jason's bravado crumbled visibly. It wasn't like that. She owed me. The only thing she owes you, Dominic interrupted, is a reckoning. He nodded to Victor's men, who moved forward with practiced efficiency, each taking one of Jason's arms in a grip that made him wince. Wait, Jason pleaded, panic rising in his voice. I have the letter. It's in my hotel room. I can prove what she did. Miguel, Dominic said, not taking his eyes off Jason. Get the letter. Miguel stepped forward, his expression grim. The room key, please. Jason hesitated, then reluctantly reached into his pocket with his one free hand, producing a hotel key card. Room 412, Westbrook Hotel. It's in the safe. The code is 3294. Miguel took the card and disappeared without another word, leaving Jason standing between Victor's men, the reality of his situation finally dawning on him. What are you going to do to me? He asked, fear replacing anger in his voice. Dominic seemed to consider the question. That depends on what's in that letter. If Riley's telling the truth, and I believe she is, then you've committed blackmail, extortion, and crossed state lines to do it. That's federal. You're going to call the cops? Jason almost laughed, disbelieving. Something tells me you're not the type to involve the authorities. A cold smile touched Dominic's lips. "No, I'm not. Victor, would you excuse us for a moment? I'd like a private word with Mr. Miller." Victor's men looked to their boss, who had been watching silently from the doorway. The silver-haired man nodded once, and they released Jason, stepping back to join their employer. "Riley, wait outside with Victor, please," Dominic said, his tone gentle but firm. I hesitated, torn between fear of what might happen and an unexpected desire to witness whatever justice Dominic planned to deliver. "Dominic, please." His eyes softened as they met mine. "Trust me." Something in those two simple words reached past my fear, touching a part of me I'd kept locked away since the night Amy died. My capacity for trust. With a small nod, I turned and followed Victor into the main dining room, the door closing behind us with a soft click. Victor studied me with curious eyes as we stood in awkward silence. "So you are the one," he finally said, his accent thicker than I remembered. "The one what?" I asked, wrapping my arms around myself against a sudden chill. "The one who tamed the wolf." A smile touched his lips, surprisingly kind. "I have known Dominic since he was a boy. Never have I seen him look at someone the way he looks at you." Before I could form a response, a muffled thud came from behind the closed door, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Victor didn't react, his expression suggesting this was exactly what he'd expected. "Will he kill him?" I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. Victor considered me for a long moment. "Would it matter to you if he did?" I thought of Jason, of the years of abuse, the terror of being found, the shame of paying him every month to keep a secret that wasn't even true. I thought of Amy, who had only tried to help me, whose death had been twisted into a weapon against me. "Yes," I said finally. "It would matter." Something like respect flickered in Victor's eyes. "Then no, he will not kill him. Dominic is many things, but he is not careless with what matters to those he cares for." The door opened then, and Dominic emerged. His knuckles were bruised, a small cut above his eyebrow dripping blood, but otherwise he appeared unruffled. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of Jason slumped in a chair, his face bloody but his chest rising and falling with steady breath. "It's done," Dominic said simply. "Victor's men will ensure he leaves the city and never returns." "The letter?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "Miguel has it. It will be destroyed as soon as he returns." Dominic's eyes searched mine. "It's over, Riley. He won't bother you again." Relief washed over me in a wave so powerful my knees nearly buckled. 3 years of looking over my shoulder, of saving every penny for monthly payments, of waking in a cold sweat from nightmares of prison cells and Amy's falling body. All of it ending with Dominic's simple declaration. "Thank you," I whispered, the words wholly inadequate for what he'd done. Dominic stepped closer, his hand rising to cup my cheek. "You never have to thank me for protecting what's mine." There it was again, that possessive claim that should have frightened me, but instead made me feel anchored in a world that had been shifting beneath my feet for too long. In Dominic's certainty, I found a strange kind of freedom. "What happens now?" I asked, leaning almost imperceptibly into his touch. "Now," he said, his thumb tracing the curve of my cheekbone, "we go home, and you decide if you want to stay." Home. The word echoed in my mind, bringing with it images of the mansion with its bulletproof windows and armed guards. Not my home, not yet. But perhaps it could be. Perhaps I could build something new in the safety of Dominic's world, something that wasn't defined by fear or shame or secrets. "And if I say yes?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "If I stay?" His eyes darkened with an emotion I was beginning to recognize. Not just possession, but something deeper, more complex. "Then you accept everything that comes with it. My protection, my world, my rules." He paused, his gaze intense. "Me." The implication was clear. Staying meant accepting Dominic not just as a protector, but as something more intimate, more binding. It meant stepping fully into the golden cage he'd constructed, accepting both its safety and its constraints. "And if I say no?" I had to ask, though the answer seemed to matter less with each passing moment. Then I'll set you up somewhere safe, somewhere he can never find you. His voice was controlled, but I heard the effort it cost him, and I'll let you go. I studied his face, searching for the lie, for the hidden trap. But all I saw was a man offering a choice. Perhaps the only real choice I'd had in years. In that moment, standing in the empty restaurant with the storm finally breaking outside, rain lashing against the windows and sheets, I made my decision. I reached up, covering his hand with mine, turning my face to press a kiss against his palm. "Take me home, Dominic," I said, the words both surrender and victory. His smile was slow, transforming his face from dangerous to devastatingly handsome. Without warning, he pulled me into his arms, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was both tender and possessive, a seal on the promise we'd just made to each other. When we finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, Victor was watching us with amused approval. "A toast at the wedding, yes?" he said, clapping Dominic on the shoulder as he passed. Dominic laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "One step at a time, old friend." Outside, the sedan waited. Miguel standing beside it with an envelope I knew contained the letter that had haunted me for years. As Dominic guided me toward it, his hand warm at the small of my back, I felt the weight of the past lifting from my shoulders with each step. "Are you sure?" Dominic asked, as Miguel opened the car door, his voice low for my ears alone. "Once you choose this life, once you choose me, there's no going back." I thought of my tiny apartment with its broken locks, of the endless struggle to make ends meet, of the loneliness that had been my only constant companion since Amy's death. Then I thought of Dominic's house, of safety and luxury. Yes, but more importantly, of belonging to someone who would move heaven and earth to protect me. "I'm sure," I said, stepping into the car that would take us home. "I'm yours." As the car pulled away from the curb, Dominic's arm around my shoulders and the rain beating a steady rhythm on the roof, I knew I had traded one kind of cage for another. But this one, lined with silk and built from devotion rather than fear, was one I had chosen freely, and in that choice, I had finally found freedom. The end.